supporting music. Friday afternoon, folks, downtown Honolulu. Ted Ralston here, your host of our show, Where the Road Leads, at the ThinkTech studios in downtown Honolulu with Jay Fidel.
So quiet here downtown.
Our station announcer sitting here to my left.
So quiet Friday afternoon downtown. They all went home already.
It didn't take long, did it, for the
Well,
station announcer function to come out?
Yeah,
No.
but you know what? I mean, I think they went home so they could watch our program.
I think
here.
they
That's
did,
why
Jay.
they're
I
all
think there's going to
sitting
be a
there.
brownout here when everybody turns their stations
Yeah,
on.
watch out. Yeah.
And we have John Mullen, one of our frequent flyers on this program, standing by in San Francisco by the magic of Skype. Hi, John.
Hello.
John, as you know from our past shows, is our cyber expert, our systems network expert, and he sees in a dimension that we don't see. So we really need a guy like John to make sure we don't stray too far from where the future's going here.
You bet.
Jay, where the road leads, road leads to the
really
future.
get crazy here, yeah.
So we thought we'd talk about, this is an unscripted show. We have no script, there's no script here at all. We haven't rehearsed anything. You haven't exchanged any emails with me on this. It's just wide open, right? We're gonna talk about one of the most interesting subjects that certainly is in your mind all the time, and that's this unmanned air vehicles, drones, unmanned air systems, whatever you wanna call it. That
Let me
emerging-
set the stage on it, okay?
Are you setting the stage? Okay.
I'll try. Okay, so here we are. We have the FAA rules, not complete. We have the drones, the drone technology, which is moving fast, but you know it's frustrated by the lack of FAA permissions. We have at least in Hawaii the need for a tech industry, and at least you know some people who could participate in a tech industry around not necessarily building drones, but programming drones and all that. And we certainly have an abiding need, in the military, but also in the civilian community for more sophisticated drones. And I think we have a belief on the part of the world in general that drones are here to stay.
We have a limit on this show as to how long a person's allowed to talk. You
Okay,
know
yeah,
that,
yeah,
right?
no,
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
we've
I
had
just
this
wanted to make sure you got that picture.
So the question is, how does Hawaii get in on it? How do we, create an industry, diversify our economy to include a UAV industry? That's the question I put before the House.
I like that question. Of course, within that question that you asked, there are several sub-questions that all require exploration. And with that as a lead, let me just show this chart to you. I'll have to show it over here so you can see it and show it to our audience at the same time. I just don't have enough opportunity to make the point that it's an unmanned air system, and it's a complete system operating in a cycle, working a mission that's important here. That is, we tend to focus on the vehicle itself, the fun thing to fly, the thing you can see fluttering around or doing its wings, whatever it might be. But really what matters is there's a mission plan up front somewhere that somebody has conceived a mission, what we want to do, where we want to take this to, what do we want to observe. Then there's a sensor selection, so we pick up either the thermal or true color or acoustic or multispectrals, even electronic spectrum. We pick up some kind of a sensor. Then we turn it over to the flight crew, which we normally focus all of our attention on. Flight crew goes off and flies the mission in conjunction with the incident commander, who's telling them it's okay to fly, it's not okay to fly, let's get this done. And then comes the important part, the analysis. And typically there's some initial analysis available in real time, or there's some a longer term analysis that is much more intense in terms of computer consumption and analysis power. And now we have the answer to the question, did we achieve the mission? Did we generate a result that the commander can use that matched the mission that we were told to fly? And that's the whole cycle. It's an ecosystem unto itself. And we often focus just on the vehicle itself. And so I just wanted to bring this point up to everybody because we can't say enough about how this is a complete cycle.
So, in other words, when I said that the programming is important, I was right.
Jay, you are so right. And then the other piece that's right on here is this is all connected. The whole picture is connected by electronic media, by the cyberspace, if you will. And when you have that kind of connection, you have that opportunity for penetration. So now you turn to a guy like John, who deals in networks of this scope and scale, which are dynamic, and you ask a guy like John, how do you see this picture, John? How are we going to make this system reliable, safe, and hard so that all parts of it work and contribute to the larger
Can I
game?
add a piece of that? It was about 5 years ago, when we had drones operating somewhere in the Middle East. I can't remember exactly where. And somebody had gotten control of them using dime store hardware. And it was very embarrassing for the United States that some adverse party had managed to control our drones using El Cheapo dime store components. You remember that, John?
Yeah, yeah, and you're actually a very good statement, because that's right into the direction where I was going to go. You know, not only have I worked with the networks, I've been working with the military for a long time, and so what we constantly try to do is protect and defend. You know, Department of Defense, and that means defend against unexpected or unauthorized behavior, and that. What most people don't usually understand is that's both internal and external. It's both a bad guy who's an enemy, perceived enemy, a terrorist or something, but it also could be somebody in your own organization who is doing something that is unauthorized. Maybe they're a plant, maybe they're this or that. Or so I go back. I really appreciate the systemic view and the entire view. That's great. I would kind of turn it around and say, how can we be had? Right? How can we be had with this? And you've just shown one way, and in the cyber world, yeah, how can we hacked, or how can we take it over? How can we be hurt, or whatever? And one of the ways you already showed that one of the things about cyber is it's asymmetric. It costs a lot of money to defend. It doesn't cost much money to attack, and you can, especially if you're kind of a hobbyist or a tweaker, or let's say you're a nation state who has billions of dollars, you can certainly find ways to come in. So I really appreciate, Jay, your approach as far as programming it, because I think, as Ted knows, from my opinion, the only way, you can't go on the honor system here. You can't have thousands or tens of thousands of people with drones and say, you will never fly in a place you're not supposed to fly. You will never do this, you'll never do that. So that might have worked 30, 40 years ago when our culture was a little bit more strict, but today it doesn't work at all. So in my opinion, my humble opinion, the only way to enforce this is to have a computer on every drone who can actually touch the avionics. And so the computer itself, and you have to say, no drone can be purchased, no drone can be flown without this kind of technology. And inside the avionics, Jay, we have programmers from Hawaii who program the devices to say, anytime you get near an airspace, anytime you get near an airport, anytime you get near unauthorized behavior, you don't go there. You take over. The guy flying the drone can't go there.
You know, this reminds me of I was trying to think of this article all day today, and you made me think of it. Thank you. It was an article in the paper about 2 weeks ago about cars, and about cars that were financed. And this is happening right now, guys, right now. The finance companies insist on putting a little widget in the car that when you don't make your payment, okay, the car stops.
Exactly.
And an interesting case where a woman was on the way to the hospital and the car stopped.
Quit. Right.
Bad lawsuit. But, the point is that kind of technology is going to be ubiquitous. It's going to be in cars and everything else, especially including drones.
And that's the point that I find interesting here, especially with John's background and experience, and seeing how we're gonna have to face this problem. What's going out there now, what we're flooding the market with, is systems that don't have that kind of protection in them.
Right.
The users aren't protected, and the public's not protected. And that industry, it came from the model airplane industry, which doesn't have those protections built in. It may have encryption in the downlink, but that's about it. And so we really have to turn that whole industry upside down, frankly, in order to create the level of safety and reliability that the public's going to demand.
What's interesting is that this science, this technology that John's talking about, that would sort of put the drone down when it was in the wrong place, or where the drone refuses to fly to a prohibited place. It seems to me that kind of turns everything on its head as far as the FAA regulations are concerned. What troubled me about it in the beginning is we're going to take them 2 or 3 years to finalize the regulations. Well, in 2 or 3 years, the technology was going to change completely.
Let me tell you about that. And John, I'd like to have your view on this as well. We had Leonard on a couple of weeks ago talking about the FAA NPRM, and we had the gang on last week. Mark and I are heading down to Ilani after this to check out the Mini Maker Fair, and we'll have a lot of drones down there. The FAA rules are very cleverly done. Now we have 10 days, 14 days. The 24th, everybody who's going to make comments has to make them. All you have to do is read the 195 pages and make all the comments you want, send them into Fed BizOps or something. In any case, the FAA comes from an 80-year history of defining technical requirements. They call them TSOs, technical standard orders, which are how you're going to build something, especially in software. DO 178, John. And so they say, you make it this way, you make it this way, here's how you do it, and you prove that it's made that way. Now what they're saying is, we can't keep up with the level of evolving technology, so we're going to tell you to be safe. And it's up to you, it's up to you to figure out what safe is. How safe is it? How do you measure safety? How do you make sure it stays safe throughout its 50-year life?
That's wrong way, Corrigan.
It's a really interesting point you make. It's going to challenge the industry because the industry hasn't been thinking that way. And now there'll be a category of really low weight systems that have no lethality, no catastrophic function associated with them, and that won't matter. They'll be toys, basically, until the economics start getting into them. But in fact, Europe's doing that. Europe has set it up with a really small category that doesn't have any lethal capability. Do what you want. There's immediate zone that has some degree of lethality, but not all the way to what an airplane would be. So it's got some level of protection. And then there's the bigger systems that are just like an airplane. And they have different sets of regulations in the three. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but it's going to take John and the network people to help us figure this out, because we just can't put out in the world there all these systems that have all that risk exposure in them.
Well, how do you know who's who? I mean, wasn't there something not too long ago that were drones over Paris, was it? Or maybe drones over Washington?
There's the White House. You ever heard of
White
that one,
House?
right? Yeah.
And no one ever found out who set that thing aloft. Maybe step one, is to make sure, if you can require this gizmo, John, in every drone, so that, it doesn't go on an airfield, maybe you should also require another gizmo, maybe even more important, that says, that's John Mullen's drone.
Right,
And
right.
we can find that sucker. If this goes bad, we know where to look. And until we have that, there'll be no accountability at all.
Well, that part's in there. That's called an N number. You see the N number, N such and such, on the side of every airplane. Every drone has to have an N number on it, and it has to have a registration certificate on it in the data bank. And it's got to have a registration template or placard on it that says who owns it. Yeah, something can't be burned.
What about an electronic number? What about what do you call that in flying? There's a thing that beeps. It identifies the aircraft.
IFF or something.
IFF. What about something which identifies this drone and tells the world who owns this drone?
That will probably happen when ADS-B or some of the more advanced air traffic management situations start to occur. There'll have to be some kind of a beacon.
About this second. What did you say, John?
Well, I said it has to happen. And the only other point I'm bringing up is there is a very large financial investment worldwide in the automatic cars, very large. And I contend, this is my own contention, that our children or our grandchildren basically will come up and say, Granddad, was it true that humans actually used to drive cars? And we're going to say, yes, it's true. And the kids are going to say, why didn't everybody die? And we're going to say they did, right? Because cars driven by computers are far, 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 far safer. You get there faster, cheaper, and far safer than a car driven by a human. And the same sort of thing will happen here, in my opinion. So I'm not saying we all have to automate everything in the world, but I can tell you, if you want to start to help protect, identify, secure, make things reliable, automate them. And that's, and now you still let people fly them, I agree, you let people fly them, but you have to know who they are, I agree. You have to have some liability control in case you could put some sort of chemical, nuclear, whatever up in a drone and fly it into somebody's backyard. I mean, and people will do it. If you can do it, they will do it. That's my point. So we have to be able to have some protection.
And to the point you raised earlier about the business and commercial business here in Hawaii, and university involvement, that sort of thing, that's exactly where that leadership's going to come from.
Right. I mean, we're sitting here talking about what do you call it? FFI, IFF?
IFF.
IFF. I'm sure that doesn't exist yet for a drone. For example, why doesn't somebody make a little black box that where the drone will have to identify where it is, who belongs to, and so forth, so that if necessary, a government drone could get up there and blow it up and stop it from whatever it was doing. It might have a nuclear bomb, who knows what.
And on that account, folks, well, before Jay gets totally out of whack here, let's take a break and we'll come back in 30 seconds.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to ThinkTech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
Downtown Honolulu, Ted Ralston here with John Mullen in California, and you, sir, are Jay Fidel.
Yeah.
Sitting here at the table with me in our ThinkTech studio downtown, and our show Where the Road Leads. We had to take a break because we had sort of a violent reaction going on here, and we've just released the shackles, so we'll hope that Jay will behave himself for this part of the
So
show.
how hard could it be to make it IFF? I mean, they already have IFF. How hard could it be to emulate that technology which is used in aircraft and make it smaller, you know, micro technology, and put it in the drone and then set it up so that the drone can't fly without that thing being
The
on?
answer to that is, I think a guy like John can give a much better answer, but we have to think of it from a systemic point of view. We have to think of the
Right.
whole system. And
Right.
small drones that aren't going to have much battery power, much range, don't need as much transmitting power in that IFF system as does a larger drone that has a lot more power and capability. John, how would we approach that problem? Thinking of the whole ecosystem here. Once again, folks, an ecosystem with everything tied together and a UAV in the middle of it, but there's the other components here that are just as important as the UAV, if not more important. So from a system point of view, John, how would we start?
Well, I would look at the risk. Just like you said the Europeans did, even though you have a very small one, I'm sure we can construct a very small drone that can go very fast and very far, or can carry somewhat of a payload. So I'm not sure the size is necessarily an index of the threat. And I guess, you know, I'm not trying to over-engineer it here, but point is, people can be hurt. They're wonderful, fun things, but they can be misused.
So we start with lethality or catastrophic effect. That's the
Right.
top of the pyramid.
Right, and I would then, whatever that risk is deemed to be, I would then assign the technology appropriate to that risk to be able to mitigate any of the big problems. I mean, if it's a balloon up in the sky, you know, I'm not sure there's as much a risk. If it's a drone, I mean, I'm sure as things are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, they're still very, very powerful, and they can also carry a lot of very critical things. So I'm not sure necessarily the size. And I know we've talked about toys versus not toys, but today, I think everybody, other than the big military ones, most of them are being used more or less as a toy today. I mean, I know UPS and some of the others are actually going forward to really deliver packages, et cetera, but it's a very immature market. We need to move on it as quickly as we can. And I just think coming at it from the point of, I mean, when you do formal methods for information assurance, you come at it from a systemic point of view, from the point of view of risk or threat or exposure. And so I think the same thing has to happen here. What's the risk? What's the threat? And then you appropriately address it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can lock them down real hard. We might make a lot of people angry.
And I think that what I've seen in all I read 100 of these things on a daily basis, and there's one or two out there of voices. I think I sent it, maybe I even sent it to you, John, a voice that just recently came out and said, we're going to work this problem right, kind of like the way John said. We're going to take it from a systemic point of view, from a catastrophic function, and distribute that down and decide where the weight boundary is that is no longer catastrophic and where it is catastrophic, and work the problem with with crack-proof software. The higher the risk, the more crack-proof the software has to be. and the more resolute the communication systems have to be. But that brings up another point. It's just the issue of spectrum alone. That's a big word, I know. We're not allowed to use big words in here, folks. That's a secret. But most of these systems work on what's called 2.4 gigahertz. It's a frequency hopping system that selects channels between the hand transmitter and the airplane, and they shake hands and then they go off and do their dance. But sort of garage door openers and car fob things and cell phones are all in that same frequency band. So we start flooding that with a lot of drones, we're going to have a lot of crosstalk and interference, and it's going to lead itself to some conflicts that we have to think about. So, John, once again, you know, we've talked about, as a matter of fact, we haven't brought up counter drone yet, but we have some issues right here in Hawaii where people have large ceremonies that they don't want to be bothered by drones, and yet they get bothered by drones because they're in a public park or something. So we're actively working, and John's helping.
I don't know how you can regulate drones unless you know who owns them, you know, and who's responsible for them.
Well,
and I think the paranoia in the FAA regulations and in the minds of the public worrying about the drones killing us, you know, and doing warlike things in a domestic community is not going to be alleviated until we can make sure we can identify them. And I don't think it's complicated. I think they just got to send out a signal saying who they are. Because from there, you can develop all kinds of software to shoot them down or take control of them and so forth. But until you have the IFF, there's no accountability.
Well, there's a level just below that, if I can suggest, and John's helping me on this, but we can identify the fact that communication is taking place between a ground station and a drone. And if the communication is taking place, the two are attempting to coordinate. So we can then triangulate that with a couple of different receivers and send an officer in and say, would you please not be here? We understand what you're about ready to do. We don't want that at this event. So that's a soft way to start this thing up. There are, of course, more extreme options in terms of how to end the activity. But as John said, if it can be done, somebody will do it. So we do have this social responsibility to educate the public, educate everybody who buys one of these.
It's a spiral. It's sort of like the virus thing and cyber terrorism.
It's no different from firearms or liquor.
One guy develops an attack, the other guy develops a defense, and it just keeps escalating. So it's the same thing here, but I don't even think we're on that track yet, except for that incident that took place in Afghanistan.
As John mentioned, this is an extremely immature industry. And it's really coming out of a very staid and stable model airplane business.
And all goes to my comments at the outset. There are things that are obvious here which should be done, and Hawaii can do them. And John agrees. He wants Hawaii to do them. He's encouraging us and suggesting that we move along and do them. Now, the question I put to you, Ted and John, is what do we do first? How do we make an industry, a diversified technology industry around drones right here in Hawaii? What do we do first? And who does it, Ted?
Okay, I can give you one answer. That's not a complete answer, but it goes this way. We've discovered within the university, as an example, and that includes the community colleges, a number of programs, maybe 15 that are going on. And they're all sort of would benefit if they knew about each other and could share technology and share understandings. So we're going to go do that. On May 7th, we've got a meeting up at Manoa to try to pull all those elements together. Anybody out there who's a PI or a grad student working on a UAV program, let me know if you haven't already talked to you, and we'll get you in on this. Idea is to develop, first of all, a clearinghouse and a body of shared information. And from that, we can then establish the research requirements that are necessary to answer the very question you've asked. In fact, while I have the podium here, the FAA has even defined what those research requirements are. They said, not only do we have to solve the safety and reliability problems, we have to make it economically useful by getting beyond line of sight. Today, we're limited to line of sight, which is quarter mile, half mile, something like that. If you're sitting on one side of a building and you want to observe the other side, you have to actually walk to the other side now to get the drone over there because you can't see it. So getting beyond line of sight is number one on the hit parade in the end state. Getting there is going to require DAA, detect and avoid, and it's going to require spectrum management in some way that we haven't even, we just opened the door on that, haven't talked about it much. And we're going to have that level of safety It says, okay, here's the mission I've chosen, here's the space reservation in the airspace system I've got. I launch and I go, and the thing has to come back. It has to complete the mission at a rate of success no different than we have in the airlines today.
So if I'm going to start a new business in drones, and I want to make $1 million, billion, what do I do? What product should I focus on?
You would, if you wanted to do what you said, you would probably go to where the least common denominator is. That's probably in propulsion systems. I would say that if you want to make money at this, batteries and motors are the place where everybody needs a battery and everybody needs a motor.
Batteries and motors, you have to have a substantial, a large investment, because it's manufacturing and it's chemical science and all that. Programming, little black boxes, programming and radio signals, that's relatively cheap.
I would actually
do that on Ilani Y Street,
You know Gayakosaki too? You must.
Yeah.
Okay. She's been on a show here. That's how you know. That's Ilani Y Street. But the analytical software down here is where the continuous cycle is going to be going. People are going to be doing analysis on data collections all the time. The data system may change, but it's still going to produce information and has to be analyzed in software. So I would think that other than batteries and motors on the one end, the software that does the analysis on the other end is where the high return value is going to be. There'll be a heavy competition in the flight management software and in the safety software and this sort of thing. That'll always be,
detect and avoid kind of software.
Yeah. What do you think, John?
Hello, sorry, I was a little bit dropped off there for a second. Can you hear me?
Yeah, our show is that boring that we get people in California falling asleep on us.
Sorry we let you fall asleep like that.
No, I think it was the connection here. No, I was about to say that there's one thing that needs to be done, you guys are doing very well, and that's getting the public involved, because this is a public issue. It's not just the technology. Part of what the FAA is trying to do here is engage the public in something that's an acceptable path. And by your show, you're getting people aware about the real issues and educating them. So I really have to applaud you on that. That's a very important thing. And I think Hawaii has a chance to lead simply because you have a focused community that can come behind you. And so you could probably get a consensus in your community much faster and easier than the consensus at large in the continental U.S. So I think that's one of your strengths. So I think that could be done. And I have to just say one other quick thing. You know, when cell phones first were really being used more and more, and then you got people on buses who started talking, and I'm sure you've had this experience where you're sitting next to someone and they're saying things that are completely inappropriate and completely, you just want to tell them to shut up, and sometimes you say, okay, please, can you please hold your cell phone? Some people go a little further and they buy these devices on the internet. You push a button and it cancels all cell phone communication within 20, 30 yards of you. And that's the sort of thing that can happen and people will be doing to drones if there isn't some sort of, more, let's say, humane and rational and civil kind of behavior. So, it is a difficult problem, but I think it all starts with the populace, the community. And that's why I think you guys are doing a great job with this show.
So socialization at the community level is what John's talking about. That fits what Gerald Wong's been telling us time and again here. In fact, he'll be on the show next Friday.
But what do you hope to gain from the community, or teach the community, or what kind of buy-in? I mean, what exactly, what does the community have to do with my entrepreneurial project where I now changed it, I'm going to do.
Oh, the community has to provide limits and constraints against which your entrepreneurial wisdom is bound.
Isn't the FAA supposed to do that?
No, that's the whole point. The FAA isn't dealing with privacy. It isn't dealing with malicious behavior. It is dealing strictly with the paperwork required to get in the air. That's where the FAA's interest ends.
Abdicating in some senses.
Hey, I got to say on behalf of the FAA, if I can, I love them to death, FAA, and they're really bending over backwards to help us. Just since we last talked, there's a new category of exemption that is almost pro forma. And if you stay under 200 feet and you have a licensed pilot running it on the ground and you're under 55 pounds, it's a very straightforward operation. Of course, you're not threatening anybody. Under 200 feet, no airplanes belong flying around 200 feet.
It's meaningless. If I want to attack the White House, I can build in my backyard a drone that will do that, and nobody will be able to catch me.
Well, that's always the bad guy in there, which is what we've been talking about.
Pretty serious
here.
when I'm
But
destroying
as far as the
things.
good side of this, farmers can use 200 feet without any problem. Environmental people can use 200 feet. We're working with a power company yesterday about doing some work on the poles and such. Under 200 feet is wonderful for them. So there's a whole bunch of area work.
I think Ted's hitting the nail on the head. The reason that the FAA is putting this forward is that if everyone followed your and my path of really constrained behavior, the populace would be angry. See, so by training and educating the populace to the risks and the rewards and the benefits and the costs, then you get people on your side. And if enough people really believed that, hey, 200 feet is still horribly risky, then I think you sway the populace, and I think you have a better chance of doing that in Hawaii than anywhere else. And now all of a sudden you can do things that are maybe more effective. But in the I'm just saying that it's possible the 200 feet is not a safe thing. It's possible it is safe. I'm more on the risk-averse side, but the reason it's there is because there would be such a backlash in the populace if the FAA didn't have it. So that's I keep thinking that the human element here, the community, is a critical partner.
Well, now suppose I take my IFF thing and I go a step further. It's not only going to identify me and let everybody know who's responsible for this thing, but it also has a built-in thing that's accessible by the FAA or by the city or the state that says you can't fly more than 200 feet, for example. And so now the drone, to be licensed, to be something I could buy or use, and not be punished for failing to comply with the physical requirements of any drone. They could make that the law, right? It's got to have this black box in there, and the black box is going to say 200 feet. Now we approach the public, and we say, what do you think? 200 feet, 300 feet, 150 feet? And they say, well, we like 300 feet, okay? So now the black box, accessible by the FAA or some other government agency, can change that. The black box limit can be changed, and that can happen all the time. It's just that you've got to have somebody who can, by law and by fact, access this drone to make sure that it is compliant.
Well, certainly the
I think
technology.
we're miles away from that.
Actually, there's some systems that are published out there that are sold today that have limitations around all the 433 airports in the U.S. The airport definitions are defined in the
So it's built into the drone.
Right. You can't turn it on if it's within 5 miles of an airport. So that's some of that protection starting to happen. That's called geofencing.
I love that. Love it. That's great.
Yep.
There's also the whole concept of insurance you could intersperse here. You could say you can't fly it unless
you can't get insurance unless you have this in, and you can't fly without insurance.
Exactly.
We're going to be in the same place that cars are and motorcycles and guns are at some point in time, I think. This is something that's got some concern, and we have to make sure we police against it. It'd be nice to find an example of somewhere in our technological life where we have these flight termination systems, which is what you described, in products we currently own. I can't think of one offhand, maybe John can, of our cell phones and this sort of thing that have, a cell phone, certainly, a radio.
That's a good example.
Because you can't use every frequency on the radio bands and radio. You can only use the frequencies that the SDR will let you get to.
Well, also, if somebody steals my, this would apply with a drone too. Somebody steals my cell phone, I can cause its cell phone to stop working. Same thing with a drone.
Also, a military base will restrict use of all cell phones. They turn them all off. It doesn't matter, you can try to use them all you want, they don't work.
Yeah. Try to drive by the CIA on the Beltway in D.C. Cell phone doesn't work.
The cell phone doesn't work.
Right. Why is that?
They're sucking all the information out.
That's a whole other show, a whole other host, Jay. Now, by the way, last time you got out of control, we had to take a break.
Okay.
And so it looks like you're starting to head for that out of control thing again here.
Break.
And I think that we're also hitting our end of the time limit here. So once again, I'd like to thank very much John Mullen from sitting up late at night in California and joining us here on this fantastic opportunity to discuss what's happening currently and in the future. And Jay Fidel, always a pleasure having you as a guest on your own show.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, John.
Okay,
Thank
Ted
you.
Ralston, folks, signing off. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.